Hey, it's Jessica Namasa with WTF Health. What's the future of health? I'm talking to the who's who of health tech and healthcare innovation. And today I'm checking in with OG real world evidence company, Flatiron Health. Oh, yeah, Carolyn, you can laugh. They've been
Hello,
around
thank
for 10
you.
years. They've been around for 10 years working to integrate real world data into the way that cancer is treated and researched. And so, here to give us an update on what's going on and to break some news here about an international expansion, I've got Flatiron Health CEO, Carolyn Starrett. Carolyn, it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It will be. I mean, I feel like right now is such a great time for the whole real world data, real world evidence market. And you guys literally have been around for 10 years, like, and counting. And I mean, very successful in this space, particularly as it relates to oncology. And so where I start the conversation is to hear, what's going on right now as far as real world evidence, because I feel like it's having a moment, particularly through the pandemic. I really think a lot of people's attention got turned to the power there in terms of the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. So, talk to me about what you feel like are some of the key characteristics about the market for real world data and real world evidence right now, particularly in oncology.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jessica. So we started this journey over 10 years ago now. And, I think we took a step back and said there's so much important knowledge that we are missing if we don't figure out ways to better understand from routine what patients experience in routine care. And so our mission at Flatiron hasn't changed. We've been deeply focused on the oncology space and on figuring out how do we best learn from the experience of every person with cancer around the world. What's exciting, I think, now is how much this has evolved. As you said, the pandemic, COVID, frankly, the cost and the sustainability of the healthcare system, the increase in personalized medicine and precision therapies, the complexity of cancer care, all of these like broad global trends have just suggested that it's more and more important that we figure out how to make use of these data, how to make use of methods and tools to learn faster, to learn more efficiently, to ensure that the populations that we learn from are representative of the patient populations that will make use of those therapies. And so, when we look out, and then you can talk about more about this later, you think about the advances that are now possible in with new generative AI approaches, with the ability to connect disparate and siloed data. We think we're only just getting started, and the industry at large has just incredible potential.
Okay, yeah, don't worry. We will touch on generative AI, Carolyn. Don't worry. But before we get there, I mean, I think, to that point, I want to hear a little bit about how Flatiron has evolved, because you guys got your start, I mean, really focused on software and building that whole, curated data set for oncology patients with real world evidence or real world data to be used as real world evidence. And now, I mean, you're layering on some new stuff. I mean, you guys are offering new services these days that provide, different levels of analysis or scientific consulting services, things like that. I mean, so talk to me how you feel like your clients, their needs are starting to evolve along with the utility for this data set as like a very valuable tool for changing the way that we practice medicine.
Yeah, the way I would describe it is in the first part of our journey, it was about proving that this could work. It was about building the foundation. How do we connect? How do we build the data models for all the various different diseases? How do we connect and link the right data elements? How do we think about how to build the appropriate endpoints into those data so that we can address really important research questions? To give you a really basic example, in the early days, it was really hard to stitch together mortality data with data that lives in an EHR, because you don't always actually know date of death for a patient because they don't come back to the hospital where they're being seen. And so, think about that problem in multiples over the years. We've invested in the methods, invested in the endpoints, invested in bringing together different modalities like claims and genomics and imaging alongside the clinical and the outcomes data. And so, moving forward, I think we have the reason we're so excited about these next sets of steps is it took that investment to give us now the potential to say, okay, the data are the data. What's really exciting is how we can stitch together data in the US with global populations, how we can think about what are the most important insights that come through that data, how can we look at end-to-end challenges that our pharma clients are facing, and think about how we bring together not only the data, but the analytical methods, the best ways of analyzing the data, the understanding that we have of guidelines from regulators and regulatory bodies, and think about end-to-end solutions to either get smarter about how we bring new therapies to market, or get smarter about how those therapies should be used, and helping to ensure patients have access to them around the world.
Let's talk more about the around the world part of this that keeps coming up, because this is really exciting. You guys have an international expansion that you've just recently announced. So I want to hear about that. And I want to hear too, Carolyn, how you think this is going to impact like the whole real world evidence industry writ large now that you're taking what you've got outside of the US.
So similar story. For the last 3 to 4 years, we have been starting to work and have launched 3 affiliates in the UK and Germany and in Japan. And this has been a long time coming, actually. A lot of the work that needed to happen to get here was about forging the right partnerships in each of those markets, understanding kind of the patient privacy, regulatory, security considerations necessary in each market. What's exciting for us now is we're starting to get to the point where we get to talk about all of that work. So yeah, as you mentioned a few weeks ago, we formally announced our partnership with the Leeds Teaching Hospital at the NHS Trust in the UK, one of the largest acute hospital trusts in Europe. And this is really the first partnership of this kind in the UK, and our team there is bringing together clinicians, epidemiologists, software engineers, data scientists to turn really unorganized cancer data and real world, routine clinical care data into high quality, anonymized, de-identified research data sets, so that we can really safely and securely help researchers find improvements in cancer treatment and care in that market. So that's kind of the new big news we're excited about in the UK. If you step back, internationally, we've been very intentional about thinking about where our model can drive the greatest impact. And we look across the UK, Germany, and Japan. There are 2 million patients diagnosed with cancer every year. Fortunately, we see 750,000 deaths from cancer across those markets. And so, the enormity of the impact, I think, is just really important to start to think about how we can expand the benefits through the use of data in new and important different ways.
One of the things that was really exciting to me with that news is, these are obviously, early steps in your international expansion, but that ultimately this could really help increase the diversity of data that you're bringing into what you guys have built over there at Flatiron. So say a little bit about that, because I think, this is one of those top of mind issues these days is, with all of these different solutions that are looking at either real world evidence, real world data, and trying to help improve. A lot of the data that's going in is not diverse enough, really, for a lot of folks. And I think we've heard a lot about that in the conversations about clinical trials, but also I would imagine in terms of that real world data about just clinical cancer care, it's got to be the same, right? So how, ultimately, do you think that getting this body of data from different populations of different ethnicities and backgrounds, how is this going to help really reshape the way that cancer treatment is developed, designed, and deployed in the future?
There is a really broad global challenge that the data that we generate from randomized clinical trials, which is the gold standard and is incredibly important data, but they aren't necessarily representative of the patients who will benefit from those treatments. They tend to be wealthier, whiter, better educated, fewer comorbidities, healthier. And then you talk about the global context. They, often, and this is part of the thinking on our global expansion, when you run trials in different markets, they may or may not be best representative of the unique context around the world. And so what we're really hoping to do is actually better tie together and stitch together the data that then comes out alongside of the the initial trial results. We can understand safety, but how do those treatments actually perform with real world populations? And we now have the ability to look at comparative effectiveness, to look at kind of efficacy and impact of various treatment alternatives in subpopulations of patients that can't be studied. Another really important application to your point is, how do we get smarter about designing clinical trials that are more representative of the patients who will benefit from those therapies? We've seen a lot of discussion lately, both from the regulators in the US in particular. The FDA has taken a really strong stand on needing to show improvement, needing to enroll more diverse patients into clinical trials. And at the same time, we now have data that can help us make those choices in an informed way. We can look at inclusion-exclusion criteria and decide, what are the right trade-offs to improve representation upfront, or how do we use real-world data to more quickly address open questions that remain when a new drug comes to market. And then the other side of health equity that we think about stepping back is, so often drugs take multiple years to go from a US approval to actually being available around the world. And so a big driver of our thinking and our work internationally is that our existing life science partners are saying, we need local data so that we can help better understand, local treatment patterns relative to what we've learned in our broad clinical trials, and make the right case for reimbursement and access to new medications in different markets around the world. And how do we shorten that cycle time from whatever it takes to get a new drug to market to whatever it takes to actually make it available for all patients?
Carolyn, what would you say some of the biggest challenges are around that right now? I'm really curious to get your perspective on this, because it feels like this has become just something that it has been zoomed in on as an issue right now, is just improving the diversity of clinical trials. And I even read it in doing my prep. Flatiron has a clinical trial diversity tool that you guys have built. And so what are some of the big issues right off the bat in terms of that we should understand, generally speaking, in healthcare on the innovation side? Like, if you were to have to pick like a top one or two of the things that are really prohibiting, diversity in trials, like what would you point to as the culprits there?
I think we have to go back to first principles. The burden and the effort and the cost of running clinical trials is just extremely high. We have antiquated technology. We rely on very human kind of manual, paper-driven processes in a lot of places. And so as a result, it takes far too much effort and time to actually run a clinical trial. And what that means is we're capacity constrained, and it's too expensive to enroll patients into trials. And so far too often a trial starts and it takes far longer to enroll the necessary patients, or it's far more expensive, or we see lots of times that we would go to all of this effort to open a site in a trial and there are no patients to enroll. So I think when you step back, I think one of the things that we get really excited about is applying that same data-driven approach we've applied to real-world evidence to actually thinking about how do we manage data through clinical trials more effectively? How do we take the same sorts of technology, the data curation expertise that we've learned, the data that actually already lives in an EHR system as a part of clinical care, and make that, link that in, close that gap so that it actually is part of the data that can be considered in the context of a trial. So I think one of the biggest and most exciting areas that we're thinking about is using data, using technology to make clinical trials more efficient and more representative. And what that will do is enable us to open them in more places, enroll more patients, expand the capacity, and hopefully learn, much more quickly, not just, after new drugs are approved, but through that entire life cycle.
All right, let's hear a little bit about the tech side of the business and how things have evolved. I think, from what I understand, or what I remember, you guys got your start really, having built this platform that took data out of the EMR and then made it usable in terms of helping create that real world data, body of data to be useful in terms of helping like reshape the way that patients were getting treatment for cancer. So I'm curious to hear where you guys are at today, and how things have evolved really, from the tech side of things. Like, what can you tell us?
I think we've touched on a couple of these themes, but you start from that core foundation of real world evidence that we generate. And I think there are 4 broad areas that we're really focused on. The first is, how do we expand the reach? How do we make sure that we can use similar capabilities to link together international populations, UK, Germany, Japan? How do we learn from learn about populations outside the US? And so that's about finding the right security, data curation, and kind of technical integrations to extend that capability. The second is, as we said, thinking about how we work in a more responsive and kind of fit for purpose way, and building end-to-end solutions that take the data we can generate both in the US and internationally, and then think about, okay, what does it really take to build a submission for an HTA assessment in Europe to understand if a drug might be reimbursable? What does it really take to execute on a post-marketing commitment that the FDA has issued for that drug? And how do we think end to end? And that's a combination of technology, infrastructure, services, expertise and best practices, experience looking across how these plays go across the board. And then in the clinical research side, how do we build those learnings into technology that's used to run clinical trials? And so we have, starting from the EHR side of our business, we work with roughly 40% of the community oncology practices in the US. We've also made a big investment in EMR-agnostic technology solutions. And so what we can do now is apply the learning of everything we see in the core network of community sites that we power to oncology specific, really custom design solutions that work in the context of an Epic or a Cerner in a hospital, to match patients into trials, to do that data management piece within a clinical trial, and also to help make clinical treatment decision supports, clinical treatment decisions. When a clinician is looking at a patient sitting in front of them and trying to decide what to do, we need to do the best that we can to make sure all of that critically important information is available and accessible.
All right, talk to me about the generative AI thing over there at Flatiron. Like, well, how are you guys looking at this? I mean, seriously, this has gotten so much hype lately, right? And so we have to ask anybody who has massive amounts of data and a platform built on top of it, and whose business is evolving to provide greater analytics and consulting services. So how are you looking at generative AI and integrating some of the more new aspects of that technology into what you've already built at Flatiron?
So a core capability, a core foundation that has enabled our business, our data curation, the talent that we've cultivated over the years has been applying natural language processing and machine learning to data curation. So it's really exciting for us to see this amount of energy and innovation and evolution come to bear. And today we use machine learning to curate data from the EHR. We use it to build predictions about data points that we can't typically get out of structured data that lives in the EHR, to make all of the other technology and solutions that we build more efficient. What gets us excited is that the new approaches that are now available to us will allow us to learn from much bigger data sets. We will no longer be limited by the processing cost and the human curation cost. And so instead of today, we take a sampling approach and we validate all of our data points with clinically trained abstractors. Over time, we see a world where we can use all of that labeled data that we have, compare it against data that is machine learning curated at a much lower cost, and still have the same level of quality, verification, fit for purpose approach, really, knowing with full transparency what we have and being able to trace back to the source while still making a much broader and bit larger data set available to learn from. So that's the good side. I think the
Tell me
important.
about the dark side here. Let's go. If there's a good side, what's the not as good side?
And I won't say anything crazy here, but we have to really pay attention to the challenges of bias and health equity and transparency and ensuring that we understand the result of the new approaches that we are using. And this is something we've thought about for a long time. We think about it on an ongoing basis in the way that we deploy ML today as we increase the range of potential options. I think we just need to continue to step back and understand traceability, be very thoughtful in measuring kind of the impact and the drivers, ensuring that we're transparent in the assumptions and that we don't end up in a black box world, if you will. And I think we're all grappling with this. This is, we're in such this hype phase, right? Where it's, end of the world, or it's, all
Greatest thing ever.
opportunity and upside. I think the reality is we have incredible opportunities to answer new questions, to learn from, a much larger patient set, to get more personalized and specific in the questions that we can answer. And at the same time, we really have to look and pay attention to where we risk exacerbating inequalities that exist. And we have to apply health prioritization, a health equity prioritization lens to everything we do. And that's how we're thinking about rolling these technologies out.
All right. So new services, international expansion, new technology being mindfully integrated in with a health disparities lens around it. What else is next here for Flatiron? I mean, talk to me a little bit about, what we can expect to see from you guys next couple years. Like what's on the roadmap as you guys continue to scale up?
We're in a really exciting phase. We've come through this journey as a company from our startup years to through an acquisition, through an evolution where we now start to get to think more long term. I've spent the last 2 years really building our executive leadership team, rethinking about the most important ways in which we think we can have a big impact on the infrastructure of cancer care, on the treatments and experience of people with cancer around the world. And so for us, it's really about focus. It's about leaning into these areas that I just mentioned. It's about executing. And most importantly, I think it's about partnering across the ecosystem with stakeholders end to end to drive real change. The risk in healthcare is always the data are there, the technologies are there, the options are there. The reality is the incentives are very challenging, and it takes, real stamina and will to drive meaningful change. And so what gets us excited is that we're thinking 5 to 10 years out. How do we ensure the next decade is, an even steeper inflection point, given all of this foundation that we have today? And I think we're really tracking to see that come to fruition.
All right, Carolyn, thank you so much for sharing that. I love hearing from health tech startups who have been around for a while and, weathered through the varying phases of enthusiasm around different technologies and different approaches to healthcare. And it looks like the future is really bright right now for Flatiron. So thank you so much for stopping by and for sharing that with us. And congratulations on that international expansion and continuing to grow the business in that way as well.
Thank you so much. This is a treat to get to connect.
Oh, you're so sweet. All right. Well, everybody, that was Carolyn Starrett. She is the CEO of Flatiron Health, getting us up to date on what's happening there at that business and also what's happening around the world with real world evidence and how it's changing the way that folks are treating cancer. So for more interviews with the who's who of health tech as they're changing the way we do healthcare, head on over to my YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/WTF Health. Carolyn, thanks again for joining us. I'm Jessica DeMassa. We'll talk to you guys real soon. Thanks so much.